Hi, everybody, and welcome to our session at EduDay. My name is Dr. Amanda White, and we'll start. I can see it's 1 minute to the hour, so I'm just going to hang out here for a little bit until we're ready. Of course, there'll be the chat function where you can ask questions, and our moderator, I'll pause every so often to allow questions as well. All right, I think we've hit right on the hour according to all of my devices and my clocks here. So welcome to this EduDay session thanks to Microsoft. First, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional owners of the lands on which the UTS City Campus stands, and the Darug people where I am living and working today. And I'd like to welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging as the traditional custodians of knowledge for our lands. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk about, do we need the traditional learning management system? And many years ago I would have said, yes, of course, we need the LMS. So to introduce myself, my name is Amanda. I love auditing financial statements. I'm a senior lecturer and a deputy head of accounting at the University of Technology, Sydney, as part of the UTS Business School. And I'm also one of the MIE experts for 2020-2021. You can catch me on Twitter at Amanda's Audit. You can catch me on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook on as Amanda Loves to Audit. So I YouTube as well as being a regular everyday academic. So let's talk about learning management systems. Now, I didn't know this until I started doing some research for my presentation today, but there are over 1,000 LMS vendors. That number just blew my mind away, because in tertiary education, we really only talk about, here in Australia, these main 5. Canvas, which seems to have grown faster than any of the other competitors, Blackboard, Moodle, D2L/Brightspace. So I'm going to talk about my experiences with learning management systems and my experience also with Teams. So UTS is in a unique position where we sit over currently 2 LMSs. We sit over Blackboard and Canvas, though from 2021, all of our subjects are moving to Canvas. We've had a staged multi-year transfer from Blackboard to Canvas. But at that same time, we've also had access to Microsoft Teams. And as a part of COVID-19, we've seen a big shift into using teaching with Teams. So what is the purpose of an LMS? This is a really great question, and one that I've been asking myself, the people that I work with, my IT department quite a lot over the last few years, I think it is. Since we announced we moved to Canvas, I've been thinking about, what is the purpose of an LMS? And is it a repository for learning materials? When I talk with a lot of my colleagues, the idea is that the LMS is where we put our lecture slides, our homework questions, self-test quizzes, but it's mostly, for a lot of my colleagues pre-COVID-19, it was a big repository. What we're seeing is an increase for us, from our perspective in accounting, is the increased use of an LMS for assessment. So proctored exams online, take-home exams, assignments, etc. And so there's also the selling point when you go to a lot of conferences about learning management systems, that a learning management system will provide, increased student engagement. Its structure, its setup, whatever its bells and whistles are there to facilitate student learning. But to me, that sort of asks the question, well, what is the purpose of the educator? I like to think of myself as part of that process of facilitating student learning, but how does our learning management system or our LMS actually support that, or sometimes even not support that? So what exactly do I use my LMS for? And currently I'm sitting in Blackboard, and it only has a few pieces of information in it. The first one is a signpost to actually find us on Teams. So I do enroll all of my students into my Teams site, but anybody who might join the subject a bit late will find the first page is simply, here's how you find us and here's how you join on Teams. I use Teams for online proctored exams. I use the LMS for online proctored exams, because in most accounting programs, our requirements for professional accreditation say that we need to have invigilated or secure assessment or identity verified assessment for at least 50% of our grades or our marks that we provide to students. So at least 50% of assessment must be invigilated or have some way to ensure that the identity of the person doing the assessment is the student that's enrolled. So we've gone down that online proctoring route at my university. And there's obviously lots of discussion about whether we should or should not proctor and what that means in these times. But of course, prior to that, I had on-campus exams in big exam halls like a lot of other subjects. I also have to use my LMS for storing grades. So my automatic grade submission process, it is not sending in a spreadsheet to an email address where they process it. It's putting those grades into Blackboard's grade center where they automatically sync into our main student systems. So that's all I use my LMS for. I don't use it to host any student notes, lecture recordings, etc. And I had used it in the past. So I have used the Kaltura media streaming platform within Blackboard. I tried to build adaptive release learning pathways to try and support student learning online. So I've always taught a bit of a flipped/blended type approach to my subject because I teach auditing financial statements. It's quite complicated. So I've always been a big proponent of using technology to help support student learning. So in digging into LMSs and trying to improve my student learning experience, I went back to my institution and I said, well, hang on, why do I have to use an LMS? Why is it important that I use one? And they said, well, there needs to be consistency in the educational experience. So if there's anyone out there who has recently transferred from one LMS to another, one of those big programs that happens when we shift out of, for example, for us, Blackboard into Canvas, is going to be trying to have some consistency across our different subjects. So students can find the right information in similar sorts of spots. And I can completely understand that because it can be quite frustrating otherwise. They want to use it to capture and store learning artifacts. And when I say artifacts, I mean that could be quizzes, it could be videos, PowerPoint slides, readings, etc. They tell us that it's about facilitating learning. And I don't know whether students agree with that, but the idea of the LMS, it can create pathways for learning. We have discussion boards to engage students. We can use quizzes and self-check. So there is some facilitation of learning, facilitation of assessments through quizzes and exams and assignments. But one of the big things that I really didn't know, but I've found is very, very important in higher education is the storage of assessments for legal purposes. So I never knew this, and this probably explains why I've been asked to keep my Blackboard site, is that I have to store information about assessments for a certain number of years in case a student brings a lawsuit or there's an investigation for the university. And the other one is that LMSs allow us to capture a lot of data about learning behaviour and learning analytics. So hello to all my viewers out there or the people on the broadcast who are into learning analytics. I think this is a really exciting area, but funneling us all into the LMS just so that that's the place we capture learning analytic data, to me, is the idea of build it and they will come. And that's where I guess I ran into some real trouble because I built a fantastic LMS site. I tried to build engaging experiences and a discussion board. And unfortunately, my experience was unlike Kevin Costner's. So I teach final year, third year undergraduate students, and I teach them accounting, which is auditing financial statements. It's a very niche topic, but if you have a public listed company, they have to have their financial statements audited. I have about 200 to 300 per cohort, taught twice a year. 80% of my students currently are located in Australia and 20% are overseas. So they're accessing our LMS and our learning from China, Indonesia, Mexico, a whole range of different countries. And we have an even split of domestic and international students. And I have flipped learning. So I prepare everything content related online, self-check learning, and then I have a live workshop where we do team-based learning quizzes and hands-on learning activities. Now, my live workshops, I do use Zoom. Why do I use Zoom and not Teams? The main reason is my team-based learning quizzes. I need to take 200 students who are in the class at once and randomly allocate them into groups of 6, and trying to do that through individual breakout rooms or creating different channels inside Teams to mock create breakout rooms just wasn't going to work for me. I didn't have time for that. But I really look forward to trying that new functionality with breakout rooms that's coming soon. I'm so excited about that. If I could do everything in Teams, it would make it a lot easier. Trying to get students to log into Zoom through their institutional email account seems very difficult, and we always run into some issues. So, Steve, I might see, are there any questions or anything at this point, just before I move on?
Nothing's come through so far.
Fantastic, awesome. And I really do encourage questions, so I will leave some time for questions at the end. So pre-Teams and pre-COVID, my learning data looked like this. I had lots of activity in students viewing content, completing quizzes, doing learning online at home, and then we had lots of great learning in class. But no matter what I tried, and I've won an OLT citation for supporting student learning, I've won my university teaching award, I think I've won 6 awards at my faculty level for facilitating student learning, but no matter what I tried, I couldn't get a lot of posts in the discussion board. I had 40 posts in 2019. My last time I taught in Blackboard was 2019. And those 40 posts only had 40 replies, and they were all from me. So there was no student discussion. I just couldn't figure out a way to get them to discuss online. And I talked to my colleagues and said, oh yeah, I make the lecture slides really vague so that students ask questions and they converse on the discussion board. And I didn't want to do that as my potential option. So it really was, that's meant to be a tumbleweed blowing. It really was that sort of tumbleweed type situation. So where exactly do tertiary students learn? I really started to get into, well, where are they learning if it's not on the discussion board? Oh, I'm about to sneeze. Pardon me. So they learn in the class, which is great. Most of my students also work. So a lot of my students work a part-time job, some work a full-time job. So they're learning at work, they're learning at home. But when I said, where are you conversing? Where are you talking about learning with your peers? They said it was on social media. So I tried a couple of years ago Facebook groups, and amazingly, I had huge numbers of traffic, hundreds of posts in the space of a couple of weeks leading up to the exam, of students conversing with each other and me just chiming in where things were perhaps going off the rails. And so I really got interested in the idea of social learning, of having these social learning networks. And I thought, how can I replicate this in my LMS? The LMS Blackboard just, there's no tagging. It's hard to, I can see that there are new posts, but I don't get notifications. The mobile app was really clunky. And so I wanted to try something else to figure out how I could get this Facebook style learning experience in something supported by my university. And for those people who are familiar with Teams and higher education will know Dr. David Kellerman. He actually came to UTS with Dr. Jonathan Gruden from Microsoft Research, and they talked about conversational agents and using Teams and bots. And David had said, I'll use Teams for teaching. Look at the students conversing with each other. And I'd use Teams a little bit, but not in that same learning type perspective. And we hadn't pushed Teams for learning at all. It was only for collaboration within groups at our institution. So why did I shift to Teams? I shifted to Teams for the social learning environment. That's the first one. I wanted to create something that felt more like Facebook because I tried building it in the LMS and they didn't come. So I thought, let me try and figure out how I can not necessarily go to them on Facebook because that excluded a lot of students who didn't necessarily want to be on social media or preferred their own sort of country specific platform. We have a lot of students on WeChat. So I wanted something social. I wanted them to be able to more passively interact, like thumbs up or heart, or to do, the laugh out loud type emojis. So that really attracted me. Number 2 is it's mobile friendly. I have meetings, I walk all around campus, or well, I'm working from home these days, so I walk between my office and my kitchen, but I really love the idea that it's mobile friendly. I can get a notification, I'm standing in the line at the supermarket, I can quickly respond to a student right then and there. It's a real world collaborative tool. So everybody's seen the statistic that I think 91 out of the top 100, Forbes's top 100 companies are using Teams. So I'm helping my students prepare for the world of work by using a real life collaborative tool so that they can put on their LinkedIn CVs that they're proficient in using Microsoft Teams. And tagging. Tagging was the best reason why I moved to Teams. Students could catch me quickly. I could tag the cohort quickly. They could tag each other. And that allowed us to have more of that real-time discussion and support asynchronously outside of the classroom, because I only get 2 very precious hours with them every single week. Now, the other side benefit of moving to Teams is GIFs. I am a bit overly addicted to GIFs, students know this, but we use GIFs a lot to talk about how we're feeling, when students do a good job. When a student asks a question, I reply, I probe them with some more questions, then they come in, they reply with a really great answer. When I talk to students about what they think about my use of GIFs, they say, when I see you post a GIF that I've done a good job, it makes me smile more than if you just typed great job. So creating that emotional component for learning, because when we learn, learning is cognitive, it's a cognitive function, but it's also really a lot to do with our emotions, how we feel. Do we feel part of the community? Do we feel like we belong? Do I have hope that I can learn well? Do I have the optimism and that belief that I can do this? Do I feel like someone's cheering in my corner? And for us, GIFs, well, for me especially, GIFs really help that. As you can tell, I'm a very expressive person, and GIFs really allow me to be way more expressive than I ever could be on Blackboard. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour of what my team site looks like. This is my subject right now. And so I have over on the left in my channels, a general channel for announcements, a channel for assessments. We have 6 modules, so each of those has a channel to keep discussion within those areas. I have a non-subject related chat where we put just general stuff, what we're watching on Netflix. I have some private channels for assessments that involve just specific students. And then I have a virtual office. This took some tweaking. My first go around at structuring teams, you'll see the survey results of that a bit later, where students said, oh, look, I'm a bit confused about trying to find something. And so we've done a lot of work with students in designing our team site, so co-design, and getting their feedback to help them really get the most out of Teams. So I put announcements up quite regularly. We use SharePoint pages to give students visual reminders of assessment tasks, and we found students understand and they remember a lot more about their assessments when they're presented with these visual aspects. Now today, all of the iconography that you see, I have a pro license to the Noun project, which I love. It has a plugin that goes right into Microsoft PowerPoint. So I use the Noun project, which I think works out about $45 per year for educators to do all of my iconography, because I really believe in that visual impact. Of course, you always have to make sure that you put in alt text for any images, but we have assessment overviews, and all of these assessments further down click down into further pages with FAQs, with more information, with videos and guides, etc. Because my students are often working full-time, part-time, we know with COVID that they've had really busy lives. I have about 50% international students, and the research is showing us that 1 in 3 international students in Sydney and Melbourne are regularly skipping meals so they can afford to pay their rent because their part-time casual work has dried up or is really minimized as a result of COVID. So we're trying to make sure that we provide as much flexibility as possible by recording all of our classes so that students can go back and look at those if they do miss our classes. So we use a lot of recordings. As you can see from there, there's not a lot of students that go back and watch those recordings. There's been a few, but most students still try to attend the class. I will expect to see those numbers really tick up as we get closer to the exams and everybody goes back to review. I'm a big proponent of the class notebook. This is such a great game changer for me. I can have a video, I can have a quiz, I can have another video, and the bit I love is that it syncs. So we had a discussion in class where I thought, oh, okay, I think something in the notebook's wrong. I could go back into the notebook, I could adjust the information, and then the next time the students opened it, it automatically synced. I didn't need to tell them to go back to the LMS and then download a new copy of the slides or information. So this really makes our notes a living document. And where students have commented on something really interesting in class, I go in and I copy that information straight into our notebook. So we use Notebook, Microsoft Stream, and Microsoft Forms to create a really great offline flipped learning experience for our students. I also have virtual office hours. So I used to just sit in a cafe on campus and my students would pop by and see me. I didn't sit in an office behind a locked door. So because we can't have that now, I do this using meetings set up in a virtual office channel, and I just set those up. I'm usually doing something else while I'm having my virtual office hours, but students just pop in to chat, and a lot of students just pop in now to just see somebody live. Talk about a career issue, talk about an assignment. I do get a lot of students who come and ask about what their career plans should be, weighing up different options, comparing different job opportunities. So I do get at least a few students coming into our virtual chat twice a week. It's on Mondays and it's on Fridays to bookend our classes, which happen on Wednesdays. Now, the other thing that we used also in the first semester is oral exams. So when a student fails a subject, we gave them the opportunity for a supplementary exam to prove that they could pass, but I didn't want them to write another exam. So instead, we scheduled oral exams, and I used Microsoft Sway, which is this first part you see here, to create a website about the exam process. I used the same sort of iconography to make things really clear to students, and then they could go and they could book their own time for this 15-minute exam. It automatically created a Teams meeting for me. I could automatically put in my availability, and it was a really nice seamless way to schedule these types of exams. And a big thank you out there to Danielle Logan and the team from Griffith University. They have put some great resources together. If you just search Griffith University and oral interactive exams, you'll see a ton of information, and Danielle and Poppy and one of their other colleagues have published this also in academic journals. So this was a really great way to try a different form of assessment, and I could really tell whether students knew what was happening and they understood the content by just talking to them, more than I ever could from reading something off a bit of paper. And of course, with it being in Teams, we just had a Teams meeting. They didn't need to log into Zoom, and then I could record them and it would save on my stream straight away, just in case I ever needed to go back to it for any sort of other purpose. So what are my insights like? And I've used Teams Insights, and there's a new Insights panel coming pretty soon. Here's some information just from the first 9 weeks of term. So remember, I had 40 posts over an entire term with 40 replies just from myself. What we've had here in the first 9 weeks is 80 posts, 167 replies, but what I'm really liking is 583 reactions. So I have a lot of students where being active and being boisterous in the class is not part of their cultural identity in terms of learning, and it's a bit more sit back and listen to the teacher type of approach. But what I really like about Teams is that I can see them interacting. They can interact in a really quiet way by using the reactions, by liking something, by hearting something, and to show to another student. A student asks a great question, they really appreciate that by giving it a thumbs up. So it's really also about showing confidence in their teammates, and also for the person who asked a question, when someone else thumbs up, they're like, yeah, I wasn't the only one with a question. So I'm really liking seeing this Insights information, and I'm looking forward to more coming up out of Insights, including the ability, I think coming up is the ability to be able to message students who've been inactive as well. So if you have any concerns, that's one way to be able to move forward. Now, at the end of my first semester, I did a survey. I said, we'd like to understand your preferences for using Teams or UTS Online, which is our Blackboard, for different aspects of learning. And the orange side is where they thought it was better in Blackboard, and the blue side is where they thought it was better in Teams. And so there was clearly a great preference in terms of contacting me to ask questions, activities to help me study for the final exam. We used collaborative PowerPoints to help students do exercises, and then I would mark those exercises, and on the best ones I would put a little Bitmoji saying like great work. And students said, well, even if I didn't get one of those stickers or one of those images, I could look for the ones that were really great, and I could look at those and I could compare them to what I did and try and figure out, where do I need to improve? What needs to be different in my work to be able to get to that standard? So a byproduct of creating this more collaborative social learning environment is an improvement in the students' own evaluative judgment, their ability to look at their own work and say, is this good enough? Because they now have something to compare it to. We can share their work with their peers. There was a great preference for accessing the subject on a mobile device. They were not, it was still good on a computer, but it was that access out of time. Video content, they liked that they could get announcements faster, and it was mobile as well. Now, Steve, how are we going? Are there any questions there in the Q&A that I need to consider?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. There's a couple from a little bit earlier on. So the first one is, do you make a new team each semester or year? And the person asking says they'd like to reuse resources, and there doesn't seem a simple way of doing that.
Oh yeah, there is some really easy ways of doing that. So when you create a new team, because I do have to keep information about student learning for legal purposes, I create a new team. But when you create a new team, there is now the ability to create the layout and the template based on another team. So I didn't do that in second term because I still had some stuff to tweak, but in first semester next year, I will create a new team, and then I will use the structure, and it says, would you like to, create basically a copy of another team, copy all of that structure over and that information, and you can absolutely do that. So that makes it a little bit easier, because I was like, oh gosh, don't tell me I have to build all of these channels and all of these tabs again. But I've discovered that you can actually just copy that information and use the other team as a template. When it comes to class notebooks, the really great thing is when you set up the new team, you set up the new notebook, it is really easy from your previous notebook to copy those pages into your new notebook for the new subject so that it's all there, and you don't have to worry about recreating those pages. The only thing that is a little bit tricky might be creating the SharePoint pages. So the SharePoint pages I've created sit within the OneDrive site, I guess, for that particular team subject. I haven't tried creating my new team site yet to see whether those SharePoint pages will also move over. It was pretty easy to just copy and paste them, but there wasn't quite an easy way to do that. But if you want to get in touch with me, and my details are at the end here, or you can search for me on Twitter or just Amanda White UTS, you'll get my email address. But the easiest, just get in touch with me and I will let you know when I try it, whether that works or not. But I found a great workaround for that, but maybe somebody else has in the chat. Were there any other questions there, Steve?
Yeah, there are just a few more. Cool. Just related to that, do the files and folders also go with that template, or do you just use OneNote for those sorts of resources?
Oh, that's really good. I'm pretty sure the files and the folders don't move, but what is pretty common for me is that I will have those files on my OneDrive, my personal OneDrive, and then I will make little edits and changes to those into the next term. But again, I have to check all this out because I've not copied using that exact functionality before, but I will report back on my blog about how that transfer process goes. And I'll probably do it at the end of this year before I go on leave. I've got 6 weeks of annual leave booked in December. It's probably in late November. I'll give that a try and I'll be sure to post about it online as well.
Thanks, Amanda. With recordings, do you restrict viewing access to the students that attended, or are others able to see those as well?
So I don't make the viewings record available to everyone in the entire organization. I know when you upload to Stream, that's the default little button. I make it available to the students who are in the subject, but to everybody. For equity reasons and from my personal ethics around teaching, while students are trying to come to class, it's just not possible all the time. So I don't require students to have attended to get the recording, but only students in the subject can see those. So we don't make them available on Stream company-wide for students to be able to randomly search. And that's often because sometimes students will have their cameras on and that will be recorded. And so we just want to make sure that we maintain as much privacy as possible there. And that also means that because classes are recorded, a lot of students, and I'm not sure how many people in the audience have found this, students in higher education are really reluctant to turn cameras on. They will do it when they know I'm not recording, but when I am recording, they're certainly a lot more apprehensive because they're just a bit concerned. And I can understand. I'm sitting here at home. I am in my studio, of which I've spent quite a lot of time, building a studio to teach from home and to do YouTube, but for a lot of students, they're at their kitchen table, etc. So that certainly is a bit of a challenge.
Thank you. I'll just answer two more, and then we might leave the others for offline. But did you coach your students on etiquette and behaviour, and how did you set expectations?
Yeah, so I'll talk about that one at the end because I have some tips for getting the most out of teams with students. So I've definitely got the answer to that one a little bit later on.
Yeah, great. And then the other one was the analytics are really great, but do you miss the more detailed learning analytics available at individual student level?
That is a really good question. I would love analytics about the class notebook. How much time are they spending in the notebook? What are they doing in there? How much work are they doing? And that would be really useful. I'd also sort of like to be able to have Stream analytics per cohort because often I reuse videos. So there is some of that, but I also feel like I'm not the learning police. So I teach third year students. They're relatively independent. They're about to go off into the workforce, most of them. So I'm fairly hands off when it comes to the learning analytics. I know that people who teach first year are tracking a lot more carefully. Hey, you didn't do 2 activities this week. Is everything okay? So sometimes I do miss a little bit of that granular data, but I haven't felt like I've had a need for any of it. So perhaps if my students were really, and a colleague of mine who uses analytical data a lot, is mostly with disgruntled students. So when students go, oh, look, I'm really upset with my mark. I think I deserved more, or I didn't pass. He will go to the analytic data to say, look, you only logged onto the system this many times. This is how many hours you spent in the system. And that's a really good indicator of, a really good reason why perhaps you didn't get as a mark that you were expecting. I've never really used analytic data in that way. I just want to make sure that students are engaging, but it is something that I would like to see the ability linked in to pass more of that Teams data, for example, Teams data with Stream data, with class notebook data, I think would be something that we'd like to see a lot of in the future.
Thanks. There are a couple more. Perhaps we'll leave those till the end so cool. We can press on.
Awesome. So in terms of freeform feedback, here are some examples. We're using Teams. I have tutors that come from industry who sit in my classroom, who are her TAs essentially, and Teams has really become a feature of the subject. And when I gave my students the option, they could come to campus class next term on Friday afternoons from 4 till 6 or 6 till 8, or they could come on campus or go online on a Friday night, or they could come any other time. They said, Amanda, we'd rather come any other time online. The subject is so good on Teams, and that's partly because of my style of teaching and my enthusiasm for teaching that it works. But it isn't all good news. So that's me pushing a big ball of dung uphill. Unfortunately, I should have got a dung beetle there. But recording of workshops means that sometimes we do have low attendance. And for most university students, is this accessible becomes the first question. For the part of my class that's accessible, I have 185 students in the room. As soon as we move on to non-assessable but tasks that are useful to help you get ready for the exam, the number of students will drop by half easily. And that's because they don't have to walk past me to get out the room and look sheepish. They just press that button that says leave meeting. And certainly that is a challenge. A lot of students are happy to lurk. And this is where I feel like I really want students to engage. But if they can learn enough to be competent and pass my exams by lurking, then I guess I should be happy with that. I would rather that they really interact, but if they can get sufficient learning to demonstrate our competencies from lurking and being a really more of a passive type of engager with liking and hearting, etc., then I'm having to sort of be okay with that. The other thing is the tension of control between institutional IT departments and the freedom to innovate by educators. So I don't have access to assignments. Now, I think there are only a handful of universities in Australia that allow their academics access to assignments on Teams, because they say, oh, look, Teams, you could delete your team anytime. It's not necessarily backed up to the same way that we back up our Canvas or our Blackboard sites. So we won't turn it on just because we're worried that you're going to use assignments in the wrong way, which really is a big blow to my ability to track student learning and what they're engaging with. So that's one thing. There's this tension between, what the IT department wants in terms of control and risk, and they're thinking about the big picture, versus my freedom to innovate by educators. I'm really jealous of all those institutions that have the Reflect app extension. I can't get it turned on at my institution. I've offered up my firstborn son as a down payment on it, and still unfortunately no go there. So it is this tension between trying to have uniformity and consistency versus that freedom to innovate, which means that there's hidden messaging. I've sort of been told this off the record. We don't want to make Teams a viable learning management system alternative because we've spent X million dollars on purchasing Canvas licenses or D2L or Brightspace or whatever it might be. There is a bit of a hidden message that sometimes comes through that we've already spent a lot of money on an LMS. We want to get value out of that. So there's a lot of push for Teams to be an adjunct rather than the main vehicle. So what are the steps for setting yourself up for success with Teams? And the first one is clear instructions. The first time was a bit of a disaster because I didn't clearly show everyone how to navigate Teams multiple times. So I have a PDF that shows step by step with screenshots and where to click. I have a video taken from that PDF when I made that PDF of how to do everything. At the beginning of every class and the end of every class and the middle of every class for the first 4 weeks, I quickly run through where to find everything in Teams, because for most of my students at university, this is the first time they've moved into Teams and it's brand new, but they come back and say later, oh, I went to my vacation job, my summer job, they're on Teams. I knew exactly what to do and how to navigate. So clear instructions is really critical. I talk to them about why I want to use Teams. It's preparing for the world of work. I bring special guests in who talk about, we want students to have these collaborative work skills, and that's really important. And I set expectations with students about response times. So, sometimes when they say, oh, look, is Teams for teaching for everyone? I would say if you're the type of academic who says, I only read emails from students on Mondays between 10 and 10:30 a.m. and on Thursdays between 4 and 4:30 p.m. and those are the only times I'm going to respond, and then once a week I will jump onto a discussion board and I will respond, then I would say to that academic, I don't really think Teams is for you. Teams is an environment where we become co-creators of knowledge with our students. We work with our students rather than being that sage on the stage. So I set expectations with my students about response times. I am pretty quick because I'm always on my phone and I've always got it handy with me. But it's about setting reasonable expectations about when to get responses and encouraging students to respond. And the other thing is training. So in terms of every time I get an email, I will reply, and then I actually set a delay through Outlook to send that email about 6 hours later. And at the end, I will always say, thanks for your question. If you ever require a speedier response, message or post on Teams. And so students know when I message them, I post on Teams, I usually get back to them within the hour. Sometimes, within about 5 minutes of them doing that. And the more that I did that, the more that I saw the conversation shift to Teams. And then the more students started answering each other's questions, like, when is the assignment due again? What topic is it this week? And for us as academics, that reduces a lot of the emotional labor. When you get the 60th email that says, what date is the exam again? You just want to tear your hair out. But having them have those discussions more on Teams really helps with that. So what are the challenges facing higher ed in the post-COVID normal? Number one, creating engaging content online. Number two, how do we encourage students to engage? And a question that's raised a lot with me and that we're tossing up and we're ruminating over a lot is, should we assess engagement? Is engagement necessary for learning? And this comes back to that lurking question. If you can lurk and still learn everything you need to learn and demonstrate all the competencies, is that okay? Do we need students to work together and have that dialogue? And then what are authentic and secure ways of assessing student learning? Because regardless of the platform, my colleagues say to me, Amanda, you're probably going to be a really great educator, whether you're on Blackboard, Teams, or Canvas. My preference is Teams because of just the conversational nature of Teams and my more expressive and conversational teaching approach. But, what are authentic and secure ways of assessing student learning that's not some AI invigilated exam where someone is watching someone else? And the image I've got here is from Dr. David Kellerman. He had an open book group exam. Students were all doing the exam at the same time, and they could access chat that you can see over here on the side to actually be able to ask each other questions, which, most academics are first shock. But then he said students were actually really clever. Someone said, I'm stuck on question 4. And then somebody wouldn't say, the answer is this, but another student might say, have a look back at, the workbook, this particular question. So it was really interesting to see this type of assessment, to see different types of assessments, more authentic assessments that might suit our post-COVID normal. So that's all I have because I wanted to leave some time for questions. That's my LinkedIn thing there. If you do want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you might have to go through the More button. My default is set to follow only because of YouTube. I do get a lot of requests from weird and wonderful people. But if you've come from EduDay, just click on the More button to connect. You can also contact me on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle there, or just drop me an email. But Steve, what sort of other questions did we have coming up in the chat? Oops, Steve there? Oh, okay, hang on. I'm going to stop sharing my screen to see if I can see the chat. Hang on. Steve, are you there? Why can't I hear him?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you now.
Oh, brilliant. So that was my my headphones playing up.
I freaked out for a second there.
There were just 2 short questions there. At the end of the semester, when you keep the team for archiving, do you lock the team or mark it as read-only, or how do you stop students changing things?
So for me, they can't change anything that is anything worth doing. I guess at anything it's accessible. So for my students, all of their assessments are locked away. So they do things like video interviews, submit a video, explain a video, etc. So all of those assessments are done and locked. Now, just hang on one second. Rodri, can you please stop playing with that? Thank you. It's the last day of school holidays here, and my 7-year-old is dying to go to lunch. I promised him lunch after this, so I've just asked him to be a bit quiet. But I hadn't even thought about archiving the team yet, because a lot of my students, we're still using that space to actually share information about future job opportunities and things. So yeah, that's sort of what was going on. Can you sit in your chair, please?
What happened?
Nothing.
Where'd your screen go?
I don't know. It says it will continue in a moment.
I think it's just because you're not sharing anything, but that's all
Oh,
good.
okay.
There's, oh, you're back now.
Slide. I'll go back to my slide just in case. It's going to be really.
Did you have any concerns going back to recordings? Have you had concerns about students not wanting to have their question from a tutorial in front of the whole class?
We have, and we've tried and moderate that in a way that students get to ask their questions anonymously. So we'll use a form, or we'll get them to say, look, if you're embarrassed to ask your question in the public chat, just send it to me privately or send it to one of the TAs privately, and they will then share that with the class saying, look, if somebody has asked. So we use that. Sometimes we use Slido, which allows students to upvote particular questions or other types of tools. But, you know, anonymous question polls using Microsoft Forms is probably the easiest way. And because these are quite often third-year students, when we get them to do an activity and then they share it, we will often remove all the names. So I will get them to submit the information on a Microsoft form, and then before I share it with the class, I will delete all of their names out of the information. We'll dump it all into an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document and then go from there.
Thank you very much. We will leave it there, and the recording will be available on the YouTube channel after sometime next week. Thank you so much, Amanda.
No worries. Thank you to everybody out there, and I hope you have a really great day, and stay safe, everybody.
Bye.